The smell of fresh ink on the counterfeit bill of sale was the first thing that alerted me to the fact that my marriage was a lie. My husband, Mark, stood in the center of our pristine, white-marbled kitchen, holding the document with a chilling lack of remorse, as if he were presenting a grocery list rather than a death warrant for my most prized possession. "Sell the Mustang by Friday, or get out of this house, Elena," he said, his voice flat and cold, devoid of the warmth that had sustained me for 7 years. The shock was a physical weight, a sudden pressure in my chest that made it impossible to draw a full breath, especially when I noticed the signature at the bottom. My own name, forged in a hand that looked terrifyingly like my own, executed while I was upstairs sleeping. It wasn't just about the car, though the 1967 Mustang Fastback, which I had named Ruby, was the last tangible connection I had to my father. It was the realization that the man I shared a bed with had been plotting in the shadows, calculating the value of my inheritance while I was busy building our life together. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of my vision blurring as the adrenaline surged through my veins, leaving a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. My legs felt like lead, and I had to reach out and grip the edge of the kitchen island just to stay upright. The world I knew, the one filled with shared dreams and Sunday morning lattes, had vanished in the blink of an eye. To understand how we got to this kitchen floor, you have to understand the life we had built before the cracks became chasms. Our home was a sanctuary, a beautifully restored Victorian on the outskirts of the city, where the air always smelled of jasmine and the cedar mulch I spread in the garden every spring. I am a restoration architect by trade, someone who finds beauty in the broken and the forgotten, and I had poured every ounce of my soul into our house. We had a ritual. Every Saturday morning, I would wake up to the sound of the vintage percolator bubbling in the kitchen. Mark would bring me a heavy ceramic mug of coffee, the steam rising in the golden shafts of morning light, and we would sit on the porch swing, planning our future. Mark was a corporate consultant, or so he told me, a man of sharp suits and even sharper ambition. When we met, he seemed to adore my independence and my passion for mechanical history. He didn't mind the grease under my fingernails after a weekend spent in the garage with Ruby. In fact, he used to sit on a stool and watch me work, handing me wrenches and listening as I explained the intricate dance of a V8 engine. He called me his Renaissance woman, and for a long time, I believed he saw me as a partner, not a resource. But there was always a shadow at the edge of our sunny life, and that shadow's name was Clara. My mother-in-law was a woman who wore her pearls like armor and her smiles like daggers. From the moment Mark introduced us, I felt her measuring me, not for my character, but for my utility. She lived in a sprawling, over-leveraged estate 3 towns over, a place that felt more like a museum of fading grandeur than a home. Clara had a way of making her presence felt even when she wasn't there, a lingering scent of expensive, cloying perfume on Mark's jackets after he visited her, or a subtle, disparaging comment about blue-collar hobbies that Mark would parrot days later. The Mustang was the focal point of her disdain. To her, it was a loud, oily relic that took up space in a garage that should have housed a luxury SUV befitting a man of Mark's stature. To me, it was my father's legacy. He was a master mechanic who had taught me that a well-maintained machine was a form of honesty. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left me Ruby, along with a modest trust fund intended for the car's upkeep and my own security. I had spent thousands of hours and nearly half the trust restoring her to her former glory. Candy apple red paint, original leather interior, and a roar that sounded like a thunderstorm captured in a metal box. For 7 years, I thought we were happy. I ignored the way Mark started to look at my bank statements with a furrowed brow. I overlooked the way Clara began to drop hints about family investments and liquidating unnecessary assets during our strained holiday dinners. I was blinded by the quiet comfort of our routines, the way we tucked each other in at night, the way we finished each other's sentences. I thought we were a team. I didn't realize that while I was looking at the horizon, Mark was looking at my pockets. The quiet life began to fray around the edges about 6 months ago. Mark started coming home later, his eyes bloodshot and his movements twitchy. He spoke less about his work and more about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that his mother's business associates had brought to him. He needed capital, real capital, to get in on the ground floor. When I told him my trust fund was for emergencies and the house, he had just nodded, but the look in his eyes wasn't one of agreement. It was the look of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I remember one specific evening, just a week before the ultimatum. The sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows across the driveway. I was polishing Ruby's chrome bumper, the cool metal smooth under my hand, when Mark walked up behind me. He didn't hug me like he usually did. He just stood there, staring at the car. "You know, Elena," he said, his voice strangely hollow, "this car is worth more than most people make in 5 years. It's a lot of money to have just sitting in a garage, don't you think?" I had laughed it off, thinking he was just stressed about his new project. "She's not money, Mark. She's memories. She's Dad." He didn't laugh back. He just turned and walked into the house, leaving me alone in the cooling air with the faint, unsettling feeling that the ground beneath my feet was no longer as solid as I had believed. I didn't know then that he had already invited Clara over the next morning while I was at a client meeting. I didn't know they had spent hours in my garage, taking photos of the car, documenting its condition, and preparing the listing that would eventually lead to the document now shaking in my hand. I was living in a dream, unaware that the people I called family were already sharpening the knives they intended to bury in my back. The week following Mark's comment about the Mustang's value felt like walking through a house where the floorboards had been loosened. Every step I took was tentative, waiting for the wood to give way. The atmosphere in our home shifted from sunny sanctuary to a pressurized chamber. Mark began taking calls in the garage, his voice a low, frantic murmur that cut off the second he heard the door creak. When I asked him who was calling so late, he'd snap his phone shut, his face a mask of practiced indifference. "Just work, Elena. The new project is demanding. Don't be so paranoid." Then came the consultations with Clara. She started showing up unannounced, her silver Lexus purring in the driveway like a predatory cat. They would closet themselves in the study for hours, the scent of her heavy, floral perfume seeping under the door. One afternoon, I walked in to offer them tea, and the silence that greeted me was so thick it felt like a physical barrier. Clara was leaning over a spread of papers, her manicured finger pointing at a line of figures. She didn't even look up. "Elena, dear," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "We were just discussing the family's future. You really should take more interest in Mark's career. A wife's support is the cornerstone of a man's success, after all." "I do support him, Clara," I replied, my hand tightening on the tray. "But I thought this project was his company's venture. Why are you so involved in the bookkeeping?" Mark didn't look at me. He was busy shuffling papers into a leather portfolio. "Mom has a lot of experience with high-stakes investments, Elle. She's just helping me navigate the red tape. You wouldn't understand the complexities of corporate finance." The "you wouldn't understand" sting was a new addition to his vocabulary. It was a subtle way of pushing me out of our shared life, making me feel like a guest in my own home. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I managed million-dollar restoration budgets every day, but I stayed quiet. I told myself it was just stress. He was under pressure. He was trying to provide. I clung to the normalcy of our life, even as the tea went cold and the whispers grew louder. The first real crack appeared when I went to the small floor safe in my dressing room to retrieve the title for the Mustang. I had a potential buyer for some spare parts I'd restored, and I wanted to double-check the engine numbers listed on the original documentation. When I turned the dial and pulled the handle, the safe was empty. Not just the title, my father's old gold watch, the deed to the house, and the folder containing my trust fund details were all gone. My heart did a strange, fluttering somersault. I called Mark immediately, my voice trembling. "Mark, the safe! Everything is gone! We've been robbed!" He was silent for a heartbeat too long. "No, Elle, calm down. I moved them. I put them in a safety deposit box at the bank. It's more secure given the neighborhood changes lately." Without telling me? Mark, that's my father's watch. That's my house deed. Our house, Elena, he corrected me, his tone sharpening. And I did it for us. I was going to tell you tonight. Don't make a scene over nothing. I let it go. I actually let it go. I chose to believe the lie because the truth was too heavy to carry. But the unease remained, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. The point of no return came on a Tuesday, a day that started with a deceptive, pale blue sky. Mark had left for an early meeting, forgetting his laptop on the kitchen island. It was open, the screen glowing with a soft, inviting light. I shouldn't have looked. I told myself I was just going to close it to save the battery. But then I saw the header of the document on the screen. Loan agreement, private collateral. My breath hitched. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. I scrolled up. The loan was for $300,000. The lender was a private equity firm I'd never heard of. But it was the collateral section that made the world start to spin. Listed in neat professional bullet points were my house, my trust fund, and one 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. I felt a sudden, violent surge of nausea. I scrolled to the bottom of the document, hoping, praying that it was just a draft. But there they were. 2 signatures, Mark's bold, arrogant scrawl, and next to it, my name. It was perfect. The way I looped my E, the slight slant of the L, the way I always crossed my T's with a faint upward flick. It was a masterpiece of forgery. I sat there in the silence of my beautiful kitchen, the smell of the jasmine from the garden suddenly feeling like it was choking me. My hands began to shake so violently that I had to tuck them under my thighs. The physical reaction was overwhelming. My vision tunneled until all I could see was that forged signature. My ears began to ring with a high-pitched, metallic whine, drowning out the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were made of water. I slumped back into the chair, the cold realization washing over me. The man I loved hadn't just lied to me, he had erased me. He had turned my life, my father's legacy, and my very identity into a bargaining chip for a gamble he hadn't even bothered to discuss with me. I forced myself to breathe, shallow, ragged gasps that hurt my chest. I needed more. If this was here, what else was he hiding? I began to rummage through the drawers of the island, searching for anything else. In the back of the junk drawer, tucked behind a stack of menus, I found a plain blue folder. Inside were pages and pages of practice sheets. My name, written hundreds of times in Mark's handwriting, slowly evolving from his script into mine. Seeing those practice sheets was worse than the document itself. It was the evidence of the time he had spent, the hours of calculated effort he had put into betraying me. While I had been cooking him dinner, while I had been telling him I loved him, he had been sitting somewhere, meticulously learning how to steal my life. I heard the sound of a car in the driveway, the low, heavy thrum of Mark's SUV. He was home. The panic that had been a dull roar in my head sharpened into a jagged, icy clarity. I didn't close the laptop. I didn't hide the blue folder. I stood up, the shaking in my hands replaced by a terrifying, frozen stillness. The woman who had been a supportive wife died in that moment, replaced by someone I didn't yet recognize. The front door opened, and I heard Mark's voice, cheerful and oblivious. "Elle, you won't believe the news. The deal is moving even faster than—" He stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the blue folder in my hand. He looked at my face. And for the first time in 7 years, I saw the man behind the mask. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that he'd been caught before the ink was dry. Mark didn't move. He didn't rush to close the laptop or offer a frantic apology. Instead, he let out a long, weary sigh, as if I were a child who had just made a mess he would have to clean up. He tossed his keys onto the counter, the metallic clatter echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "You weren't supposed to see that yet, Elena," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I was going to explain everything once the first round of funding cleared. It's a bridge loan. Temporary. In 6 months, we would have been set for life. Set for life? I whispered, my voice cracking. I held up the blue folder, the pages of practice signatures fluttering like wounded birds. You spent weeks, months, learning how to steal my name. You forged my signature on a legal document to gamble away my father's house and his car. This isn't a bridge loan, Mark. This is a crime. He stepped toward me, his face shifting into a mask of wounded pride. I did it for us. My mother's estate is tied up in litigation, and this investment was the only way to secure our future. I'm a partner in this, Elena. I'm not just a consultant anymore. I'm an owner. An owner of what? I spat, the heat of my anger finally beginning to melt the ice in my veins. An owner of a pile of lies? You didn't ask me. You didn't even give me the choice. You just took. The front door opened again, and the sharp, rhythmic click-clack of designer heels announced Clara's arrival. She didn't knock. She never did. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes immediately darting between me, the laptop, and the folder in my hand. She didn't look surprised. She looked disappointed. Oh, Mark, she sighed, smoothing her silk blouse. I told you she'd find out if you left your things lying around. You've always been too careless with your tools. Tools? I turned on her, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it felt like it would bruise. Is that what I am to you? An ATM with a restoration degree? Clara walked over to the island, leaning against it with a grace that was entirely performative. Don't be so dramatic, Elena. It's just property. Houses can be rebuilt, and that car, well, it's an eyesore that's been holding Mark back for years. A man in his position shouldn't be married to a woman who spends her weekends covered in oil. That car is none of your business, I said, my voice rising. And neither is my trust fund. Actually, Clara smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I had ever seen. It is my business. You see, the private equity firm that provided the loan? I'm on the board. We needed a guarantee, and since Mark has no assets of his own, thanks to your insistence on keeping everything in your name, we had to use yours. It's all perfectly legal, Elena. Your signature is on the page. The room seemed to shrink. The walls, the jasmine outside, the memories of 7 years, it all felt like it was closing in on me. It's a forgery. I'll go to the police. I'll have both of you arrested. Mark finally spoke, but he didn't look at me. He looked at his mother, seeking guidance. Elena, listen to reason. If you go to the police, you ruin me. You ruin our reputation. And the loan is already spent. The money went into the project 3 days ago. If the collateral is pulled now, the firm will sue us for everything we have. You'll lose the house anyway, and you'll do it while watching your husband go to prison. Is that what you want? I want my life back, I screamed. I want the man I thought I married back. Mark looked up then, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the man I had loved. But it was quickly extinguished by a sharp look from Clara. He straightened his shoulders, his expression hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. The deal is done, Elena, Mark said, but there's a way to fix this. The lender, my mother's firm, is willing to restructure the debt. They'll release the lien on the house and the trust fund if we provide a gesture of good faith. They want the Mustang. Now, there's a collector in Dubai who's already made an offer that covers the interest and the initial principal. I felt the blood drain from my face. You want me to sell Ruby? To pay off a loan you stole in my name? It's the only way, Mark said, his voice dropping to a low, manipulative hum. Sell the car by Friday, Elena. Give them the title, and we can forget all of this happened. We can go back to the way things were. We can be a team again. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized he was waiting for me to cave. He was waiting for the supportive wife to sigh, cry a little, and hand over the keys to her soul to keep the peace. And if I don't? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark glanced at Clara, who gave a small, imperial nod. He turned back to me, his jaw set. Then you're not the woman I thought you were. If you care more about a heap of metal than your husband's career and our marriage, then there's nothing left here. Sell the car or get out of this house, Elena. You have 48 hours to decide where your loyalties lie." He stood there, paralyzed by his own cowardice, refusing to meet my eyes as he delivered the ultimatum. He didn't defend me. He didn't even try to reach out and touch my hand. He just stood in the shadow of his mother, a puppet who had finally realized he was made of wood. 48 hours, Clara echoed, her voice a sharp contrast to the silence. "I'd start cleaning out your desk if I were you, dear. It would be a shame to leave your blueprints behind when the locks are changed." I looked at the two of them, the husband who had forged my life away and the mother-in-law who had coached him through it. My pulse was a rhythmic thud in my ears, a steady, driving beat that began to drown out their voices. I didn't cry. I didn't scream again. Instead, I felt a strange, cold click deep inside my chest. It was the sound of a lock turning. "You want the car?" I asked, my voice as level as a horizon. "It's the only sensible option," Clara said, assuming she had already won. "Fine," I said. "I'll give you my answer on Friday." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, their triumphant whispers trailing behind me. I didn't go to our bedroom. I went to the garage. I sat in the driver's seat of Ruby. The smell of old leather and gasoline enveloped me like a hug from my father. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They thought I was choosing between a car and a marriage. They didn't realize I was choosing between being a victim and being a storm. Mark had spent months learning how to forge my signature, but he had forgotten one very important thing. I was the one who knew how to take things apart and put them back together. And I was about to take his entire world apart, bolt by bolt. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang until the sun began to bleed through the garage windows, casting long, crimson streaks across the concrete floor. The click I had felt in the kitchen wasn't just anger. It was the precision of an architect seeing a structural flaw that required a total teardown. Mark and Clara thought they were playing a game of chess, but I was the one who knew the foundation of every room they stood in. By 8 a.m., I was on the phone with Silas, my father's oldest friend and the sharpest estate attorney in the tri-state area. When I told him about the loan, the collateral, and the folder of practice signatures, the silence on the other end of the line was cold enough to frost the glass. "Elena," Silas said, his voice a low rumble of protective fury. "They haven't just committed fraud, they've attempted to liquidate your entire existence. Do not confront them again. Do not tell them you've spoken to me. If they want the car by Friday, we'll give them a Friday they'll never forget." For the next 48 hours, I played the part of the broken wife. I walked through the house like a ghost, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped. I watched Mark regain his swagger, his chest puffed out now that he thought he had successfully bullied me into submission. He even had the audacity to try and kiss my cheek on Thursday morning. I didn't flinch, but inside, I felt a surge of such pure, crystalline loathing that it was all I could do not to recoil. "You're doing the right thing, Elle," he murmured, his voice oily with relief. "Once Ruby is gone, the pressure will be off. We can start over." I didn't answer. I just looked at the practice sheets I had hidden under the floorboards of the garage. I wasn't just saving a car, I was dismantling a predator. Friday morning arrived with a heavy, gray fog. Clara arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, accompanied by a man in a sharp gray suit whom she introduced as Mr. Henderson, the representative from the private equity firm. Mark stood by the fireplace, looking like the man of the house, though the house was currently being used as a bargaining chip for his own cowardice. "Do you have the title and the keys, Elena?" Clara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. She reached out a hand, her eyes glittering with the prospect of finally winning. I stood in the center of the living room, the space I had designed, the floors I had polished, and I felt a sense of immense, quiet power. I didn't reach for my purse. Instead, I walked over to the laptop still sitting on the sideboard and pressed play on a digital recorder I had hidden behind a photo of my father. The room filled with the sound of Mark's voice from 2 nights ago. "The loan is already spent. The money went into the project 3 days ago. Your signature is on the page. Give them the title and we can forget all of this happened." Mark's face went from smug to ashen in a heartbeat. "Elena, what is this?" "This," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a cold blade, "is the sound of a confession. And this," I pulled a thick manila folder from my bag and dropped it on the coffee table, "is the forensic report from the document examiner Silas hired yesterday. It proves that every single signature on that loan agreement is a forgery. It also proves, through metadata, that the practice sheets found in this house were created on your laptop, Mark." Clara's composure fractured. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Henderson, ignore her. She's hysterical." "Mr. Henderson isn't from a private equity firm, Clara," I said, as the front door opened. Silas walked in, followed by 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Division. "And neither are you." Silas did a little digging. "The firm you've been using to lean on me is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, registered to you, Clara. You weren't helping Mark with a project. You were using my assets to pay off the massive gambling debts you racked up in Macau last year. You were stealing from your own son to save your own skin." The moment of silence from Mark was different this time. It wasn't the silence of a man ignoring his wife. It was the silence of a man realizing he had been the ultimate pawn. He turned to his mother, his eyes wide with a pathetic, childlike betrayal. "Mom? Is that true? The project? The ownership? It wasn't real?" Clara didn't even look at him. She looked at me, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You little bitch. You should have just stayed in the garage where you belong." "I belong wherever I choose to stand," I replied, my voice steady. "And right now, I'm standing on the evidence that will put you both in prison. Mark, you forged my name. Clara, you orchestrated a $1 million fraud. The police are here for the documents. My lawyers are here for the divorce and the restraining orders." As the detectives moved in, Mark finally found his voice. "Elena, please! I didn't know about her debts. I thought we were building something. Don't do this! I love you!" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but a hollow shell of a man who had traded his soul for a lie. "You didn't love me, Mark. You loved the security I provided. You loved the house I built and the money my father earned. You didn't even have the courage to sign your own name to your betrayals. You used mine." The murderous look Clara gave me as she was led out in handcuffs was the last thing I saw of her. Mark followed, stumbling, sobbing, begging for a conversation that would never happen. I stood in the doorway and watched the police cars pull away, their sirens silent but their lights flashing against the jasmine bushes. 6 months later, the house feels different. The air is lighter. The scent of jasmine no longer feels like it's choking me. I kept the house. It turns out that when a loan is predicated on forgery and fraud, the liens vanish pretty quickly. Clara is serving 4 years for grand larceny and fraud. Mark took a plea deal. He's out on probation, living in a studio apartment and working a job that barely covers his legal fees. He calls sometimes, but I never pick up. His voice belongs to a life I've already demolished. I spent this morning in the garage. Ruby is idling perfectly, the V8 engine a rhythmic, powerful heartbeat that echoes off the walls. I polished the chrome until I could see my own reflection, not the tired, anxious woman I used to be, but someone sharp, focused, and entirely whole. I've realized that restoration isn't just about fixing what's broken on the outside. It's about stripping away the layers of rot and the coats of fake paint until you find the steel underneath. People think the most dangerous thing you can do to a woman is take everything she has. They're wrong. The most dangerous thing you can do is give her a reason to find out what she's truly worth. I put the Mustang into gear and backed out into the sunlight. The road ahead was wide, open, and entirely mine. Some things are worth selling, but my soul was never one of them.